Old powers waken, shadows stir. An age of wonder and terror will soon be upon us. An age for gods and heroes.
The glass candles are burning, and you're listening to the Obsidian Nights podcast. Welcome to Obsidian Nights, where we go through chapter by chapter and do in-depth analysis of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I'll add other books later. My name is MJ from the YouTube channel Gray Area. Sweet summer children, make some noise wherever you are. So you can watch these podcasts in visual format on YouTube on my channel, where I do a lot of other things you might care about or you might not care about. But if you're listening to this podcast on Apple, Podbean, wherever, please leave a review and let me know how I'm doing. We all need assurance sometimes. So we're still in Winterfell, and it's Demon Monkey Day, Tyrion 1. And my special guest for Tyrion 1 is Mark from Sir Hunt's Reviews. Hey, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
The pleasure is mine. Do you want to let everyone know where they can find you at?
Absolutely. You can find me over on YouTube. If you just type in Sir Hunt's Reviews, I'll most likely be the first channel that pops up. And you can find me over on Twitter at Sir_Hunts.
Okay, so go ahead on over to Sir Hunt's Reviews and check him out. And today we're going to be talking about Tyrion 1 of A Game of Thrones. So when the chapter opens in the Great Stone Maze of Winterfell, a wolf is howling, and his howl sends chills through Tyrion Lannister. So Tyrion is in the library of Winterfell. He has been up all night reading, and he's not just reading any book. He's reading a 100-year-old discourse on the changing of seasons by a long-dead maester. So being that A Game of Thrones starts off in the middle of the longest summer in known history, and it's leading to a pretty brutal long winter or long night if no one stops it, I find the book choice a little curious. Both this book and the other book. So the second book that he's reading is actually not a book. It's a Valyrian set of scrolls named Engines of War. And Winterfell has the only complete copy of Engines of War. Engines of War is pretty rare. Tyrion has seen bits and pieces of it across the kingdoms, I'm guessing. I want to say, so something really doesn't make sense to me, right? So I was reading it and I'm like, hold up. This is a medieval story. What is up with engines being in the story? Like, the concept of engines in a medieval story doesn't really make sense to me.
It's kind of one of those things, though, that sort of like this story, you can't put a specific thumb on what time period it is because they know things all the way up to like sterilization techniques. So it's kind of like, it covers many different things, but for the most part, it seems like it's set in the medieval era, but they know things that we don't find out in, our society, we didn't find out until hundreds of years after that time period. So
yeah, that's true. And then it's Valyrian Scrolls. So we know that Valyria was very much more advanced than Westeros. Like, apart from everywhere else, basically Valyria is super advanced. And then I was kind of thinking, like, maybe I'm overthinking it, because this story does have like different kinds of engines, like siege engines or trebuchets. And I don't know, when I hear Valyrian Scroll and Engines of War being Valyrian, it could be about like maybe some super advanced siege weapons that they had in Valyria. But I think, given Tyrion's fascination with dragons, that one of the biggest engines of war in Westeros is 100% dragons and dragon warfare. So I think Engines of War might be about dragons and dragon warfare. And Tyrion reading about it early on in the chapter, or in the book, is suspect. Like, are you Tyrion Targaryen or Tyrion Lannister?
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely more of a thing in the books. It kind of makes me also wonder if maybe he knew something was coming. You know, like we are about to begin the War of the Five Kings, so it almost shows you that maybe Tyrion is the most prepared. Like we found out about him sort of like in his first chapter anyway. You know, he fell asleep in a library of all places. You know what I mean? And he's probably, I think, the most well-read out of all the POVs.
Yeah, he's definitely the most well-read character. Like he has that line, "A sword needs a whetstone like books." Wait.
Your mind
I need to
needs
look that up.
You got it. You had it. It was your mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone, something like that.
Okay, yeah. I was about to say, don't let me fuck that up. So yeah, he says your mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone. So he is one of the most learned men. Like I feel like Tywin missed the opportunity of sending him to the Citadel. Why? Like Tywin wanted to be rid of Tyrion. Why didn't he just send him to the Citadel?
Yeah, that's a good
like
point.
A maester.
Yeah, I feel like there might have been, maybe Tyrion's size would have prevented, although that's not true. He's like an acrobat in the books. I was going to say maybe his size prevented him from doing certain maesterly duties like procedures or something. And then also the fact that he has to be an advisor to a leader or a lord, they wouldn't give him maybe as much credit because he's a bastard. Or maybe Tywin was just too proud to have his, even though we all know he hated Tyrion, maybe he was just too proud to have his son, you know, be sent to something like that. Because I feel like he could have, like, Sam's father basically forced him into going to the wall, and, you know, there's certainly Tywin could do that.
Yeah, I wonder why Randall Tarley sent Samwell to the wall and not the Citadel as well. Like, you want to be rid of these children, send them to the Citadel. But Tywin chooses to just torment Tyrion, and Randall Tarley sends Samwell to a place where he renounces all claims to lands and titles and such and such and such and such, which I think you do that when you become a maester as well. But I'm wondering if, you know, dragons being hinted at in this chapter has anything to do with Tyrion being a Targaryen. I personally am more Tyrion Lannister. Like, I think he's a Lannister. Well, I will say this. I honestly think that George has left it open on purpose. Like, he hasn't decided which way he's going to go with Tyrion's parentage. Is Tyrion going to be a Lannister or is he going to be a Targaryen? Like, I say this because George describes himself as, like, his writing type as a gardener. Like, he's not an architect where he sets up all these plot points that, I don't know, have you saw his outline, like, that he initially set up?
Yeah, I remember looking at it once or twice. Didn't he have Jon and Arya initially?
Jon, Arya, and Tyrion, like, in a love triangle. It's the story that is in that outline is vastly different from the story that we have. So with him being like this gardener, I think that he plants a lot of seeds and he waters the seeds that he wants to grow. And that's why, like, so many theories are so convincing, because George has planted these seeds. And the question is, which seeds will he continue to water? Like, what would it mean to the story either way? Like, I like Tyrion being a Lannister and being Tywin's true-born son. But I do see the potential for Tyrion Targaryen. Like, it's undeniable that he's obsessed with dragons and he dreams about dragons. He even dreams that he's Meleys the monstrous, like, with two heads, fighting in battle in a Dance with Dragons. So I definitely see it. Like, what do you prefer, Lannister or Targaryen?
I mean, I'm House Targaryen, so I prefer as many secret Targaryens as possible. But if we were to look at something like the practicality of it, doesn't really make sense, right? So we have the rumor. I think the strongest rumor is probably the fact that we have Joanna being, like, bedded by the Mad King on their wedding night. But if that was the case, then that would mean that Jaime and Cersei are Targaryen.
Which I love that idea.
And then that would mean that Tyrion would be Tywin's one true son. And I
Love
can't
it.
remember the genetics, but I feel like there's something with Lannister men having some, like, not every Lannister man, but every other generation or something happens where they have some sort of, I could be mistaken there, but I feel like I love the idea of Tyrion being a secret Targaryen, especially since we know he's about to meet Daenerys, or he kind of already has, but he doesn't exactly. They don't officially meet. You know what I mean? Like, she just thinks he's like a dwarf or whatever. But I like the idea more than I think it is practical. I think it's more so, like you said, that Tyrion is Tywin's bane, his one true heir, and he treats him the most like shit.
Yeah, I agree that Tyrion being a Lannister is way better, in my opinion, than Tyrion being a Targaryen. Because when I look at it, like, well, how does Tyrion being a Targaryen advance the story? And most people that I ask this will say, well, because he's going to ride a dragon. And I'm like, why is he going to ride a dragon? Why do we need Tyrion riding a dragon? I don't think he's going to ride a dragon. I think Fagon is going to have the Viserion, not Tyrion. But we're getting a little far from Tyrion 1. So let's get back to Tyrion 1 of Game of Thrones. Tyrion 1 is our first point of view of an outsider in A Song of Ice and Fire. So every other chapter has been the Starks: Eddard, Catelyn, Bran, Arya, Jon, or Daenerys, who is far removed from what's going on in Winterfell. So everybody in Winterfell has been a Stark. But now we are in the mind of the Lions. And I think, like, right off the bat, Tyrion is a likable character. And I think George does a lot to make us like him in this chapter. I feel like he brings some humanity back into the fold. Like, the Stark children, Jon and Arya, in their first chapters are kind of sulky, depressing, little bastard lord and little lady that have dire wolves as pets. Bran Stark is like a little lord that is climbing castle walls and dreaming of being a knight hanging from gargoyles. And Ned Stark is like this warden of the North, Lord of Winterfell, war hero, like best friend of the king. And like, it's like, okay, well, can we really relate to these people? And then there's Tyrion. And he's like normal. He reads and he tells jokes. And that's basically the extent. So like, he brings the story back in before it goes out too far, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like that's part of the genius of George's writing, without actually coming out and saying, hey, he's on the opposing side, but I'm going to hint at the subtlety of his good nature. You know what I mean? At some deep down, he's supposed to be a good person. So I think like the jokes that he has with Tommen and Marcella are sort of like hints to that. The fact that he's delivering the news of Bran possibly surviving is sort of what everybody's wondering anyway. It kind of, like you said, it's the perfect start to his character.
Right, it really is. Like and to me, like, he's the most relatable character so far, because all of them are kind of like fantasy tropey characters that have all these fantasy elements, like pet dire wolves that follow them around and they can swing from castles and stuff. And it's funny because if you look at Tyrion and how he's described, he's the least normal looking character in the story. He's a dwarf with mixed matched eyes and uneven shoulders and white hair, and I just think he like centers the story and brings it back. So for me, when I first read A Song of Ice and Fire, Tyrion was the character that I liked the most in the first few chapters. And I feel like Tyrion is like this Machiavelli type person. I could see Tyrion being the author of The Prince, which is basically like the ends justify the means. Like, and even him reading the like you were saying, him reading that book, The Engines of War, it shows that he's interested in politics and war, and he's educating himself on that stuff, because maybe he does know something is coming. And I think George R.R. Martin has made like a historical comparison for Game of Thrones, like to the War of the Roses. No, not I think. I know. George R.R. Martin has made historical comparisons for Game of Thrones to the War of the Roses, but more specifically, he made the comparison that Tyrion Lannister is like Richard III. In plays and shit, Richard is always like ramshackle and hunchback and ugly and evil. I feel like Tyrion Lannister is likely more like the real Richard III than Shakespeare or whoever else depicts him. I feel like George took Tyrion and wrote him as he saw Richard III.
Yeah, and it's also like interesting who he chooses to like inspire characters to be, because aren't the Yorks, who Richard III, like the side that he fights for, the Yorks, aren't they supposed to be the most like the Starks? And then you have the Lancasters as the Lannisters. So it's interesting how he's pulling, like, this is a good guy from the other side. You know what I mean? And ultimately, in the end, you could say with him being handed the king to Bran, it's similar to that. Like, with, I don't know.
If he ends up handed the king to Bran in the books, then yeah. I mean, I think more so, like, when you look at historical comparisons and the things that George does from history, there are some one-to-one comparisons, but not really. They're always like mixed up and jumbled up. And I love that about George, because I love historical comparisons and I love the mythology that he adds. He always adds like multiple, like if there's a folklore story, he takes two folklore stories, puts them together, makes them one, and puts it in his book. And I love that shit. So as Tyrion descends the steps and heads outside, it's dawn. The men are in the yard practicing swords. He overhears Joffrey and the Hound, Sandor Clegane, talking, and basically they are both wanting Bran to hurry up and die. Like, basically they're like, hurry up and die so they can leave Winterfell. So Joffrey is complaining about the wolves howling and it keeping him up at night. Sandor offers to kill the wolf. Joffrey says the famous line, "Send a dog to kill a dog." This is one of the first signs to me that Joffrey is a psycho. Like, I think children that harm animals is, like, in real life actually a clinical sign of being a homicidal maniac.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's always, like, even as a kid, I remember people joking, like, you know, so you find out one of the kids like hurting animals, that's like, oh, they're gonna be a serial killer, you know. So yeah, for sure.
When we get Joffrey, like, we know that Joffrey is a piece of shit. Like, we find out in Arya's POV and Jon's POV that Joffrey is a piece of shit. But not to the extent where he wants Bran to die and he's excited that the Hound has offered to kill this direwolf. And this is like that send a dog to kill a dog line is what eventually convinces Tyrion that Joffrey is the one that's hired the Catspaw to kill Bran. I'm wondering if Joffrey also wanted to frame Tyrion for it, because the library where Tyrion just was is what gets burned down, and Littlefinger somehow points the finger at Tyrion as well and blames him for saying that the dagger is his. So I'm wondering if Littlefinger and Joffrey had put their minds together and framed Tyrion.
It's definitely possible. I think the fact that we see Joffrey was able to keep his composure as long as he did when he's being mentioned in Arya's POV and everyone else's POV before we see it from Tyrion lets you know that he knows how to play the game. His mother Cersei, she teaches him from an early age, like, don't say shit like, I wish your decrepit brother, or excuse my language, would die because his dog is annoying me and I can't sleep. You know, we see that he doesn't, like you said, that's the first sign of it in the book, so we see that he's able to play the game, so for sure. Yeah,
Tyrion 1, it's definitely a more intimate look at Joffrey, like, because you're getting it from his uncle. Like, it's his uncle's POV, so it's definitely a more intimate look. So Tyrion counsels Joffrey on doing his duty as a prince and a guest in someone's home. Like, he tells him it's past time you called on Lord Eddard and his lady to offer them your comfort. And Joffrey just doesn't understand the principle of this or even care, to be honest. And that gets him slaps from Tyrion and instantly makes Tyrion likable.
Yep. So he gets slapped twice.
Yeah, he gets slapped twice. And there's like cuts. You can go on YouTube and there's like an hour-long slaps of just Tyrion slapping Joffrey. I find it odd that Joffrey's mother or father hasn't already given him this counsel, like already told him to do this. And this task of leading Joffrey down the right path or correcting Joffrey's behavior is falling to Tyrion. And Tyrion is the one that has to make him do what he needs to do, which I definitely think is foreshadowing of their relationship as far as the books go, because Cersei lets Joffrey like do as he likes, but Tyrion will come in and check him. And Tyrion, like when Joffrey's king, Cersei kind of just lets him do whatever he's doing. And Tyrion is like, no. And then Tywin, which Tyrion is a mini Tywin, but Tywin, he does that shit too. He's like, the king's tired, take him to bed.
Yeah, he's like, we'll be hearing none of that.
Yeah, none of it. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on Tyrion being the one to have to tell Joffrey to do what he needs to do and not his parents?
I feel like it just sort of relates back to what you were saying a few minutes ago. It's about Tyrion this is all about explaining why he's the best Lannister, and George is giving you examples of it and not giving you like a direct line. Okay, Tyrion disciplines Joffrey. He's the only one that checks this would-be king who, if he were to take the crown, would be the worst thing to ever happen to the Seven Kingdoms. And guess what? It's probably going to happen. So George establishes that earlier by giving that discipline role to Tyrion as opposed to Cersei or Jaime, because he wants to show you, look, like Tyrion is the one who's the most capable out of all of them.
Yeah, Tyrion he's the good Lannister. Yeah,
they probably have disciplined them as much as they can for a certain point, but also, like, you know, this is a different era. If Cersei were to do something like that, I'm pretty sure, you know, Joffrey somewhat fears Tyrion, I guess, because we're saying, you know, Tyrion embodies Tywin, so Tywin or Joffrey probably sees that side of Tyrion a little bit and almost has that fear that he does of Tywin, his grandfather. So it shows you that you know, early on what kind of person he is and what kind of priorities he holds. Where like being formal as basically slapping Joffrey for refusing to just do something kind, like, hey, you know, I'm staying in your house. I know your son just lost his ability to walk and he's like unconscious right now and he may die. I'm sorry that's happened. Joffrey refuses to do that, and Tyrion's the one to be like, no, you need to.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of things in this chapter as we go forward that you guys will see that make Tyrion likable, that were purposely put there to make Tyrion likable. So the Hound tells Tyrion, like, he warns him, and he's basically telling him, you know, Joffrey won't be a boy forever. One day he will be king, and he's going to pay you back for that smack. And Tyrion's like, good, I hope he remembers. And if he doesn't, be a good dog and remind him. And I think, like, Tyrion is more so saying, like, I hope he remembers the lesson. Like, I hope he remembers the courtesy that he should extend to his lords, bannermen, like his vassals. Like, this is just common courtesy shit that Joffrey doesn't know because he's a petulant little bastard. But the Hound directs Tyrion to Jaime, and Jaime's eating breakfast with Queen Cersei and her children. And we kind of find out what's going on with Bran. Tyrion definitely suspects Jaime and Cersei no more than they are letting on. Like, he notices glances between them. So Tyrion visited Bran, and it seems he might live. And Cersei and Jaime seem a little distraught about this news. And Tyrion, he's smart. He's an observant man. Like, You could tell he's observant just like from his descriptions of the actual characters. Now that we know him more, like Tommen and Myrcella and Joffrey and Cersei, they are all accurate. But Tyrion really has a soft spot for Jaime. There was very little Jaime took seriously. Tyrion knew that about his brother and forgave it. During all the terrible long years of his childhood, only Jaime had ever shown him the smallest measure of affection or respect. And for that, Tyrion was willing to forgive him most anything. So, when it comes to Jaime, and my belief is that Jaime's story is one of redemption. He has to start off like the absolute worst because his story is about redeeming. So you can't redeem from being a good person. Like, you have to be a bad person in order to redeem yourself. But when you find out, like, this cool guy that we've met that's slapped Joffrey and told him what to do and seems to be on the right side of things, likes Jaime the most of his entire family, the guy that just pushed a 7-year-old out of a window in the previous chapter. Like, my mind says your family, your entire family must be awful. Like, that's my thought. You have to have an awful fucking family if the guy that just pushed a kid out of the window is the only person in your family or from your childhood that's ever shown you the smallest measure of affection or respect.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it also shows you that Jaime and Tyrion's relationship is probably something that's going to endure the any sort of tumultuous time they go through. Their love for one another is going to endure it, and George is letting us know that early on, by mentioning that Tyrion has such a crazy devotion towards Jaime that no matter what he does, he'll always love him.
Yeah, he will. Like, Jaime and Tyrion's relationship, like, right now in the books, like, as of A Dance with Dragons, like, their relationship is really bad, really on the rocks, but I do feel like because of the bond that they've had since childhood, that it will be something that's going to be mended. But, like, Tyrion has a lot of, right now in A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion is a bitter soul, and he has a lot of soul searching to do, and I hope that it leads him back to consoling with his brother. I hope.
Yeah, I feel like his feelings about, making them promise that he would get to rape Cersei when it's all said and done would probably, like, if we're to believe what Jaime says earlier on in the books, not necessarily his attitude towards her now, or I guess if he even survives his what's about to happen to him in the Riverlands, I feel like that would normally raise some sort of maybe strife that could come up between Jaime and Tyrion, but I feel like both of their attitudes towards Cersei may actually bring them closer, I guess.
Yeah. I agree with that, because Jaime does have, like, this disdain for Cersei right now, and where he's just, like, ignored her pleas for help. But I do wonder, like, is he gonna make it out of Lady Stoneheart's cave? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like there could be, obviously Brienne will bring him to her, but I don't know if Brienne's the one that's supposed to be forced to, or maybe, I guess, the executioner, I don't know if she would bring herself to be able to do it.
Yeah. It's hard to say. It's hard to say because there's a lot going on, but Jaime's weirwood dream being in a cave is kind of scary, because his sword does go out, his fire does go out, but it's scary. But I always thought that Jaime would fight against the others, so I'm hoping he doesn't die in a cave. But also, I would rather him die at the hands of Lady Stoneheart than to die by a rock.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even, not even kidding.
Yeah.
So, so we get new info on Bran from Tyrion, and Bran is likely to live, but he would never walk again. But one of the most interesting parts of this chapter is Tyrion says, "It seems the wolf is keeping him alive." I'll read the quote. I would swear that wolf of his is keeping the boy alive. The creature is outside his window day and night, howling. Every time they chase it away, it returns. The maester said they closed the window once to shut out the noise, and Bran seemed to weaken. When they opened it again, his heart beat stronger. So what are your initial thoughts about that quote?
The connection of, like, I mean, we could say
the wolf.
Yeah, we could say what's happening with Jon, where everyone thinks he warged into Ghost right after being stabbed. We could say that, you know, Bran's spirit left his body because it's so broken, and he's maybe in his, like, literally warged into Summer's body, and when they close the window, he loses that connection, and he feels as though as long as he could see his human body, he won't forget who he is, because we all know, like, when you're warging, if you stay too long under the sea, you'll drown. So maybe he feels he could have that rooted connection to this plane of existence if he can physically see himself through the window, like while he's in his.
I like that.
While he's in his direwolf.
I like that idea. The Starks are really connected to their direwolves, and I think like maybe Bran may have been warging in and out of Summer, like during his coma or wolf dream, or like Summer was trying to warn Bran not to fly while he was having that coma dream. Because from the last chapter analysis that I did with Joe Magician, it seems that like the crows wanted one thing to happen and Summer wanted another. Like the crows, Bloodraven, they wanted Bran to fall. They wanted Bran to open this third eye. But Summer seemed to be warning Bran. So it could be like that. But I do like the idea that maybe Bran is actually inside Summer and trying to keep that connection with his human body.
Yeah,
I like that.
It could also be like, you know, with the natural instincts of dogs, they're to protect their human companion. So maybe Summer wasn't necessarily, going, I guess, forbidding him from falling, but maybe forbidding him from going down the route in which, if it's similar to how it was on the show, maybe Summer ends up dying, but maybe she knows that Bran ends up dying in the process. Not like dying in the actual physical sense, but dying and becoming something else.
Yeah, something evil.
Yeah, or just another thing entirely, you know.
Yeah. So, and it's in this chapter that we learn that Tyrion is going to the Wall, which is like more reason to love him, and all of the more reason that Robert is a terrible king. I feel like a king going all the way to Winterfell and then not going to the Wall to check out the Night's Watch is like a slap in the face to the Night's Watch. Like, take some notes from good Queen Alysanne. She went to Winterfell. From Winterfell, she went to the Wall. And they named a keep after her. Because it's important that the king knows what's going on with the guardians of their northern border to their kingdom.
Yeah,
but Robert don't give a fuck.
I feel like that's just part of Robert, though, because if he had done that and gone to the Wall, then he wouldn't be Robert. He wouldn't be the fat lazy king that we know him as at this point in the story, where it's first starting out. If he were to do something that showed him being just a wise ruler, we wouldn't have the same image of, you know, this drunken former sort of like high school, Letterman jacket guy, you know.
Yeah, like a frat boy that graduated 10 years ago still showing up at college parties.
Yep. Like, hey, you remember that one
Robert.
time? Yeah.
That's Bobby B all day. Well, we also find out that the whores will go begging from Dorne to Casterly Rock if Tyrion would go celibate. And I feel like this is all the more reason to like him. Like, Tyrion is just extra likable, and I feel like George goes to great measure for you to like Tyrion, which is good because it's good to connect with someone on the other side of the story. Like for example, I don't love Stannis, but all the Stannis stuff is basically told through Davos, so it's easier to digest because I love Davos. So I think it's good. Like, a lot of the antagonist story is told through the POV of a very likable character.
Yeah. Makes you, like you said, it makes it more palatable.
But that's basically all for Tyrion 1. Tyrion 1 is not a long chapter. It's a very short chapter, and it's a very short introduction to Tyrion. But I do think that it's a great introduction because George goes way out of his way to make you like Tyrion, and I like him. Like, just reading this chapter alone, I like him.
Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite characters. In like you were saying, the fact that he's so likable makes you realize that George enjoys probably writing, and I think he said this in interviews. He enjoys writing for Tyrion a lot more than other characters, and that shows. You know, Tyrion in a dance becomes a different person, but in the beginning, you know, it kind of forces you to go back and reread his earlier chapters to remember why you fell in love with him as a character. You know what I mean? And then you see why he is the way he sort of is. But also the fact that we get to hear sort of his internal monologue, or like what he's thinking, helps even more, I think, make him a fan favorite than, like, as opposed to the TV show where we're just forced to see him interact with other people and we don't really get to know, you know, what's going on.
Yeah. What sold it for me on Tyrion was, one, he is correcting Joffrey. He's correcting the evil prince that no one wants to correct. Two, he's fighting for a boy that he doesn't really know. While everyone's like hoping he dies, Tyrion actually wants him to live.
Yeah.
And he's suspicious of his family. And what also sells Tyrion for me is that he is down for an adventure. He wants to go to the wall. He likes having sex. He wants to, like, he reads books. He tells jokes. He slapped the shit out of Joffrey. How can you not love Tyrion at this point? I mean, there's going to be a lot to dislike about Tyrion down the road, but right now, I love him. Love him. Love him, love him, love him lots.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he, you know, sort of teases Jaime a little bit, where he says, like, you know, if Bran is able to talk, I wonder what kind of story he'll tell, sort of thing. And then then Jaime questions Tyrion. He's like, oh, where are your loyalties really at? It sort of shows you that Tyrion knows somewhat about Jaime and Cersei, so it kind of lets you, you know, see that he's, I guess, somewhat accepting of that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's another thing to sort of like about him.
Well, he says it. He says, I will forgive Jaime for almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's Tyrion 1. And next week, I will be having Tony Teflon on from Teflon TV to talk about Jon 2. Tony is going to be defending Catelyn because everyone knows I hate her. So I specifically picked him because he likes her. But that's going to be fun. But in the meantime, Mark, do you want to let everybody know where they can find you, what you're up to? Give them the spiel.
Yep. So once again, I'm Mark from Sir Hunt's Reviews. You can find me over on YouTube at Sir Hunt's Reviews and also on Twitter at Sir_Hunts. I'm working on like sort of best to worst of each season of Game of Thrones, and then I'm also going to start pumping out some House of the Dragon videos just to sort of get everybody on the same page of what to expect in maybe the first couple seasons of the television show.
Yeah, I cannot wait for House of the Dragon.
There will be fire and blood.
As always, thanks for listening to
Obsidian Nights.
And we will see you next week with Jon 2. Okay, my sweet summer children, stay safe.